It's the devil's weed time. I chose this mostly as a policy paper, and it was meant to look at the past history and the research into this sudden change of public opinion about marijuana legalization, especially now with Illinois on the verge of making a decision itself. I thought it would be an interesting topic to see if there was a window of opportunity now for Illinois to pass such legislation. I want to start with a little history. In 1938, a movie was made that had the had the intent to play on people's fears and puritanical beliefs. At the time, it was called Reefer Madness. This poster over here, it was a part of it. It was shown in a lot of high schools and colleges at the time to try and discourage this, even in the 30s. Since then, of course, in the 30s, we also had the prohibition on alcohol being removed. But this just continued, this puritanical belief. Since then, in 1970, the Nixon administration passed the Controlled Substance Act, which was signed by President Nixon, and he placed marijuana as a Schedule I drug, saying it had no medicinal value alongside of LSD and other hard drugs. However, he did assign a commission to research to see if things were done correctly. But President Nixon's own commission, and as you can see here, the marijuana, a signal of misunderstanding, just the title alone should tell you everything. By 1973 came out, and it came out against a lot of what Nixon had done by placing marijuana on a Schedule I, having no medicinal use with the tightest restrictions. He went against it and kept it controlled, but he became afraid of the counterculture that was in it, and the counterculture used weed on a pretty regular basis at the time, and that was part of his paranoia that he had at the time. Since then, other presidents increased the prohibition, strengthened it. Most notably, President Reagan's war on drugs that he started, and then later in the 90s, President Clinton, with his 1994 crime bill, resulted in a massive incarceration and spending on that incarceration. As can be seen here, since 1980, the total amount of people being arrested and put in jail, mostly your county and your local city jails, are filled with people who have been arrested for very small amounts of marijuana. Right here you have a proof of this. 52%, according to the ACLU, 52% of all drug arrests were for marijuana, and it wasn't the kingpins as they wanted to get. Rather, it was nothing more than these small people who would not turn over their drug dealers. The expenditure for police and corrections and the courts have just exponentially went up since the 80s in this crackdown of nonviolent, victimless crimes. This is what actually stoked my attention. I can remember as far back as the 70s, and I can remember 60 Minutes doing a bit on legalization and how it was gaining ground. And as you can see, it didn't gain a whole lot of ground. In fact, it kind of went into the tank there in 77. But then you have this sudden turn of events starting in the late 90s after Bill Clinton didn't inhale. And then right here in 2009, 2010, you have this sudden reversal. I couldn't really place my mind on what would suddenly cause this sudden reversal, so I wanted to research it to see if this is a momentum, if this momentum is going to continue. Policy diffusion. There's a strong indication This has been brought about by policy diffusion on several levels, but several different kinds of policy diffusion, not just one. Uh, Mostly in my first research piece that I did as a lit review, should Mary Jane be legal? And this was done by Schnabel and Seville, whatever their name is, are. And it tied marijuana legalization with gay marriage. Gay marriage was ahead of this curve, but at the same time, it mirrored it. And this shows, first off, through their research, that it was generational. That was the biggest shift, is that the World War II generation, of the reefer madness is passing away, is going. And the 60s counterculture that smoked so much when they were younger, they're now in their 60s, and then they grew up raising their children with less and less of a puritanical view, which changed the entire social mores of our society at this time. Now, what this chart is showing here is the age. This is the generational shift that is the big mover and shaker of all this. This is what is actually causing the polls to change. Not necessarily the policy diffusion from state to state, but from at least a popularity in a poll. This is what's shifting. It is the age. It's a generational shift. Those that are plus 46, they've grown, but those that were younger shifted even more. And I saw the breakdown in this, and it broke down even into bigger things. And the younger they are, of course, the more that they are for pro legalization and pro gay marriage. They mirror each. As you can see here, this is a chart where it shows that all except in 2010, they're on an identical pathway, and there was a strong correlation between gay marriage and the legalization of marijuana. The other side of this study also covered was the Democrat, Republican, and Independent. These, if a state has a Democratic governor in the next research, it has a much greater chance of becoming a state with legalization. However, the Republican is the lower chance because of the fact, and that's going to play out in the next research piece, that you have your ideologies, which are going to be the strongest counter movement to this. So that's going to play in the more conservative Republicans. However, the one thing that I did note in this study also was this upsurge of independent voters, those that are claiming to be independent from Republican and Democrats. It does not mean that they are independent from Republican and Democrat. It just says that they say they are, and it is these independents that have the greatest amount of movement towards marijuana legalization. The second largest factor was, of course, the nearness of states. This is going to play out in one thing. I just read today, and it's right here on my phone, that 2/3 of the people in Illinois are for marijuana legalization. This is so new. This is just happening. I didn't include it in my report. I should have. This would have played very well because my whole report was to see how much of an opportunity Illinois was going to have to pass this legislation. And it says that 12.3% of people in Illinois, as opposed to the federal government, have 11.3%, claim that they use marijuana on a regular basis. But this Paul Simon Public Policy Institute at Southern University said that 2/3 of people are for it, and that's recreational use. That's not just medical marijuana. Now, this kind of flies in the face of this research because Illinois is surrounded by states that are it's all illegal except for Missouri that have decriminalized it. Illinois stands out kind of in the middle of Midwest, kind of alone. But that could also play into the effect of why it is now considering it, and why it is probably, as this article predicted, would pass. And it's on the top 15 states most likely to pass it. The nearer you are, the more states you have on your border uh, that have some form of either medical marijuana law or have some form of legalization or decriminalization, the greater the chance of that state accepting some form of decriminalization. It ends up with 4 states. It tops out at 4 states. If you have 4 states bordering you, touching your borders, that have decriminalized, that increases the chance of up to 25% that the state will pass a decriminalization law. The farther away from those states are, the less likely. And ideology plays the greatest role in that pushback factor that lowers the chance, according to this Bradford and Bradford research. As I said, Illinois is kind of flying in the face because it's surrounded by nothing but states that still see it as criminal. But maybe it's the idea is maybe the revenue in the budget is going to be probably the third, and that is what I mentioned as my third factor that causes policy diffusion. The one thing I want to bring up is that Canada, one of the only G7 countries, is going for a total legalization, and that again will put quite a bit of pressure also on the northern states, let alone on the federal government. As we see this decriminalization momentum building, my other research that I used in this said yes, it all is going to work, but it will be limited because there will be states that have ideology strong enough to avoid the pushback, unless, of course, it becomes federally decriminalized. Then of course, or at least federally taken off the Schedule 1. The methodology, as I said, this was originally a policy paper and meant to suggest, after gathering research, more than it was to actually research. However, I gathered the research and compared it to the chances of Illinois passing or decriminalizing marijuana. And I've come to the conclusion that it will pass, according to this, even though the diffusion part with the states bordering is going to go against it. I think the budgetary push, along with the momentum of the entire country that is going through this, I believe it will pass. My findings and analysis, as I just referred to, I believe Illinois will pass it. I believe more states will. There's 28 states that have already decriminalized marijuana in some form or another in the medical marijuana. Colorado has been the one that has kind of been the test and everything that everybody's been going to because, of course, the revenue has been pretty big. And everybody who has gone through all these states that have gone through the Great Recession coming out still owing money and having large deficits are looking at this as a possible way to increase revenue. The negatives are found to be myths put out by that Reefer Madness talking about marijuana being a gateway drug. That's what the commission said early on, and all the studies since have shown that those myths have been false. So you have this dropping of the myths, you have generational change, and you have this diffusion through contact and distance. And you see the ideology mores, you see them loosening in this country, mostly. Not every state, but in most states, the mores are changing as gay marriage and many other things are being accepted. My work cited. I appreciate you watching the video. Thank you so much.